Tonight on Capitol Journal, we'll review the week that was in the Alabama Legislature, from the budget's moving to the list of bills still awaiting a vote. Senator Arthur Orr discusses the Education Trust Fund and historic teacher pay raises that are included. State Representative Merika Coleman explains the effort to reorganize Alabama's Constitution and remove racist language. House Majority Leader Nathaniel Ledbetter previews the final stretch of the session that begins next week, including when the session might end. And we'll take you to the legislative softball game from this week with some good fun and hard hits. It's all next on Capitol Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. With the legislative session in its final stretch, the days are getting long here in the State House. Lawmakers met for the 24th, 25th, and 26th legislative days. That leaves 4 days remaining, which could all come next week. More on that when I speak with the House Majority Leader later in the show. The big news this week was in the Senate, where the Education Trust Fund saw some major changes affecting teacher salaries. Senator Arthur Orr, who chairs the Senate Education Budget Committee, introduced an updated version of the budget that included major improvements to salaries and benefits for teachers. In addition to the 4% across-the-board pay raise, the new budget calls for additional raises for teachers with 9 or more years of experience. Let's take a look at that new matrix. Those with 9 years in the classroom get a 5% raise. Those with 15 years in the classroom get a 7% raise. 20 years gets you a 10% raise. 25 years, a 12% raise. 30 years, a 15% raise. And 35 years in the classroom gets you a 21% pay raise. Orr said the salary increases are meant to help recruit and retain quality teachers and address the ongoing teacher shortage.
We had a system that had been in place for quite some time where basically educators did not receive a raise except every 3 years. And so they, for 2 years you would not get a raise, your just salary's the same. And we do well at starting pay as a state, but then the middle years, years 10 through 20, 25, we fall behind and we just are not keeping pace with other states. And so we have a shortage of teachers. And so you see, how are we compensating them? And so when we looked into that, we found that really what would work better would be bringing a small raise, a 1% raise every year, as opposed to making them wait every 3 years, and putting that into play. And what it means to those that have been in education for quite some time, let's say 20, 25, 30 years, they'll be seeing significant raises to their salaries.
The pay raises are being called historic and the biggest in a generation. Capitol Journal's Karen Goldsmith has more detail on the education budget overall.
The $8.2 billion Senate-passed Education Trust Fund budget includes several increases for often less talked about education priorities.
A lot in dollars in higher ed, a lot in the Senate. A lot of interest in junior colleges. How can I help the junior college in my area? How can I get them what they need? Sometimes I think our junior colleges are overlooked, but they're so vitally important for a link for people wanting to continue on from high school, and that's the next rung up. They don't go to Auburn or Alabama, they go to junior colleges, and we need to support the junior colleges, and that's something that I was surprised to see a large interest among members to try to move the junior colleges along financially in the budget.
There was also a 25% increase in the prison education program. The investment is to reduce recidivism.
That's certainly the goal, so they can get a skill, so they can get some training, and then when they leave prison, they've got some skills that they can use and get on into the workforce, which desperately needs their help.
The budget also includes an additional $8 million for substitute teachers.
We were paying substitute teachers in some places $10 an hour.
Right.
So imagine going to local school 8-9 hours and you're getting paid. You can make more at Burger King, I think, these days.
Again, we hope to attract at least a good substitute teacher, and then that's not wasted time in the classroom for the students, and we don't have just glorified babysitters.
The 4% pay raise for all education employees remains in place, but teachers with 10 or more years of experience will receive every year an additional raise ranging from 1% to 20%. Those with more years of service will see the greater raise amount. Both raises go into effect October 1. For Capital Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
The $8.2 billion education budget is now back in the House, and a conference committee is expected to be called early next week. Also on the issue of education, the House and Senate gave final passage to Senate Bill 171, the Alabama Numeracy Act. The bill aims to improve the state's lagging math scores by targeting more resources to struggling schools, deploying math coaches to help teachers, and holding schools accountable for continued failure to improve. Representative Alan Baker carried the bill in the House. He pointed out that only 22% of Alabama students are proficient in math. The state also has 28 K-5 schools that are zero proficient in math.
One of the things that we've tried to do with this bill is really have a strong focus on K-5. Early math is what a lot of this bill is about. Our numbers, some of you are aware that 22% of students across our state are not I said only 22% are proficient in math across the state, and we actually have of K-5 schools, we have 28 schools that are 0% proficient. Once again, I said 0% proficient in 28 of those K-5 schools. So we are in a crisis.
The House also gave final passage to the general fund, sending it to the governor's desk. That budget totals $2.7 billion for fiscal year 2023. A record level of spending for the state. It includes a 4% pay raise for state employees and a one-time bonus for retired state employees. The budget also includes funding for the Department of Mental Health to stand up more regional and community mental health centers throughout the state. State Representative Steve Klaus, who chairs the General Fund Committee in the House, said the budget is healthier than it's ever been.
So they were just a couple of issues. They were big by themselves, but we were able to get those worked out, and we've got what I would say is the largest budget in state history, and we're also, along with that, paid off all the debt that we owed to the Alabama Trust Fund 8 years in advance. So made a lot of progress here in the last few years.
Not everything is moving in the State House. Gambling legislation is now officially dead for the session. There were competing proposals this year, one wide-ranging package in the Senate with a lottery, casinos, and sports betting, then another in the House with a lottery only. Both bills got out of committee but haven't made it to the floor. Representative Chip Brown, who sponsored the House lottery bill, said it wasn't in the cards this year.
Well, I think just assessing where we are, and the last thing I want to do is put forward a bill that gets out of the House and then gets to the Senate and stalls in the Senate. I mean, that doesn't do any of us any good, and so I think we need to look at getting started earlier in the session on a bill like that and working to get it all the way through till we get to the governor's desk. I think we just don't have the time right now to work on something as complex as that. So I think it's just something we're going to have to look at addressing in another session.
Also dead for the session this year is a charter school funding bill. Senator Del Marsh said his Senate Bill 302 won't get a vote, but not because of opposition or lack of support. Those involved in the legislation said there were some technical problems with the funding language. So instead of asking lawmakers to potentially have to fix the law next year, they'll just try again next session. There are currently 8 startup charter schools in the state, and while they get federal and state funding, they don't receive local money, which is what Marsh's bill aimed to remedy. The Senate did pass a supplemental appropriation bill that allocates $2.9 million to charter schools. Marsh said that allocation amounts to about $1,000 per charter school student. A bill to end the practice of suspending driver's licenses for unpaid fines and fees advanced through committee this week. and is one step closer to final passage. Senate Bill 117 from Senator Will Barfoot is intended to allow those with fines and fees unrelated to unsafe driving to keep their licenses so they get to continue working and take care of family. State Representative Merika Coleman is carrying the bill in the House.
What we found, we got advocacy groups to come and talk with us about the challenges that people have to getting employment, to being able to secure a home. You have to have a valid driver's license to be able to do those things. And there are quite a few folks that are poor, that have not been able to pay for traffic fines, or they have failure to appears because people move, especially a lot of low-income folks move a lot, and the court might not be able to find you, and their driver's license is being suspended. And so what does that do? It further pushes them into poverty.
That's one of several bills lawmakers are trying to get across the finish line with just 4 days left in the session. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott has more on another bill from Coleman that is moving through committee.
And I was contacted by a young woman as well as Representative David Faulkner, who explained to us the reason why we need to have House Bill 370, and what it is, it actually extends the statute of limitation for certain sexual assault cases.
Representative Merika Coleman's HB 370 seeks to adjust the statute of limitations for sexual assault cases in Alabama. There was emotional testimony in this public hearing.
I am 58 years old. When I was 16, I was sexually assaulted by a teacher in high school. I never told anyone at the time what happened to me, not my friends, my parents, or anyone at the school. A combination of fear and embarrassment kept me quiet then and in the intervening years. In 2018, I decided I could no longer let the assault have control over me. When I told my story, I found 6 other students who were abused by the same teacher, and I have no doubt that there were more.
My name is Lee Korfman. I was 14 years old when I was sexually molested by one who was oath-bound by his public position in the Etowah County court system to protect me. I was the youngest of a group of women who also came out against Roy Moore, but they were also teenagers. By this point, the statute of limitations had passed. I had no recourse. I felt threatened and speechless to come forward at that time. Eventually, I told my story to the Washington Post, November 9th, 2017.
This meeting did feature opposition on HB 370 before it wrapped up.
Many states have differentiated between the perpetrator and the entity. And I think that's one thing for the future that we ought to be looking at and talking about.
This is a process, and this is a process that we go through every year. We don't finish every bill that we start every year. We restart them the next year. Got all the confidence in the world this will be likewise.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
Lawmakers said that if time runs out on the bill this year, they will try again next session. We'll have a full rundown of bills awaiting final package Monday on Capitol Journal. Finally tonight, a bit of fun. The legislative softball game took place this week at Riverwalk Stadium in downtown Montgomery. The House competed versus the Senate against each other in a charity game, raising money for the Big Oak Ranch. Fortunately, Capitol Journal's John Holman was there to capture some footage. Let's see. That's the Senate up to bat in white. As you can see, they not just senators, but they allow some staff to play as well. That's Gil Isbell up to bat and some of the staff and lobbyists in the crowd. I think this is Arthur Orr up to bat. Yeah. But the play at the plate involves Senator Chris Elliott, who collides with Representative Reed Ingram. Wow. Yeah, that had everybody talking and everybody arguing because there was a big disagreement about whether he was safe or not. That led to some filibustering, you might say. Republicans and Democrats in the Senate united in their disagreement.
We're doing a great job. The referee can't see. Senate's doing a great job. We've got some conflict related to the rules, but really our team's doing fantastic.
And there's footage from Rod Richardson from the Senate. The House graciously awarding the Goat Hill Trophy to the Senate, the victors. But I will say this, the Senate said that the House was full of ringers. Not necessarily just lawmakers on their team. So the event, again, raised money for the Big Oak Ranch, and the game was sponsored by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Alabama. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
Next, I'm joined by State Senator Arthur Orr, who's chairman of the Senate Education Budget Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Todd. Good to be with you.
Big day for you, well, really big week for you, because y'all have dispensed with the Education Trust Fund. You had it in committee this week. Significant changes, then had it on the floor, passed on the floor. What are some of the top takeaways from this education budget, particularly the changes y'all made in committee?
Not such a big thing for me, but I think a big thing for the state, and certainly for the school children of the state. We had some changes in the Senate. I think the primary change that people noticed was changing the salary matrix for educators across the state. We had a system that had been in place for quite some time where basically educators did not receive a raise except every 3 years. And so they, for 2 years you would not get a raise, your just salary's the same. And we do well at starting pay as a state, but then the middle years, years 10 through 20, 25, we fall behind, and we just are not keeping pace with other states. And so we have a shortage of teachers. And so you see, how are we compensating them? And so when we looked into that, we found that really what would work better would be bringing a small raise, a 1% raise every year, as opposed to making them wait every 3 years, and putting that into play. And what it means to those that have been in education for quite some time, let's say 20, 25, 30 years, they'll be seeing significant raises to their salaries. And we want to keep people in education. If we can't find adequate staff or teachers these days, we've got to adequately compensate them. So a lot of excitement. I was surprised. I've gotten emails from around the state from educators saying, hallelujah, finally we feel like someone heard us, because how demoralizing is it to sit there and not get a raise for years, and unless the legislature were to do across the board type raise. So hopefully it'll have a good impact on our schools and retaining our educators and attracting educators in the future.
Well, it was significant. I mean, people are calling it historic. It's really the biggest raise in a generation, probably. And I know that, you got the across the board 4% for everybody, but the more experienced you are, more years of experience, the more percentage of raise you're eligible for. Is that correct?
That's correct. The longer you're with us in this education. And another thing our current system had in place was a cap after 26 years if you still wanted to be in education. So you take somebody, let's say they hired in at 22 right after college, and they worked for 26 years. Okay, now we're at 48. They're 48 years old. They wouldn't receive a raise for the rest of their time in education unless there were an across-the-board type raise. So those people, why would you want to stay in a job you're never assured of a raise, unless perhaps the economy's doing really well and we have the funds available in Montgomery, and that's quite frankly a crapshoot sometimes. So this gives them something to hang on to, and hopefully again keep them in the classrooms, keep them engaged in education, and reward them for their service, and we appreciate what they're doing.
You speak of the teacher shortage. Y'all also address this Tier 2 retirement benefits thing to bring them more on par with the Tier 1 teachers.
That's correct. Well, actually more on par with states around us, okay. And that's kind of become a sore point for those looking at a career in education or as a state employee. So we've taken both the ERS and TRS, and we've put a 30-year retirement. So after 30 years, you can retire. But if you're Tier 2, for every year, and all this is related to Tier 2 employees, if you retire before the age of 62, there's a 2% reduction in your retirement check for every year prior to the age of 62 that you retire. Mm-hmm. So it'll have some impact. And again, the encouragement is keep people in the workforce. If you're somebody who hired in at 22, worked 30 years, you're now 52, and then you want to retire, but you're not 62, there will be a 2% reduction per annum on that, much like Social Security. That was our model. You want to retire early, you can do that at 62, but if you're not going to wait till you're 67, you're going to get a 5% nick each year from Social Security. So similar type system, and we wanted to do that again to encourage people to stay in the workforce. And there's a significant cost savings to the taxpayers, if you will, when it comes to doing it this way, as opposed to just flat 30 years. Then you start getting your full check for the rest of your life. And in the private sector, you don't get that deal in most places.
Let me ask you just kind of overall, I mean, record budget, $8.2 billion, putting in these teacher pay raises, historic pay raises that everybody's pretty excited about. I'm assuming that adds up every year, right? So
yes, it will be, and that's a long conversation I've had on multiple occasions with the fiscal office staff. Will this be sustainable? It only cost $70+ million to implement this, so it's significant in how it kind of plays out, and it really helps those, again, that have been in education for quite some time. And the pay scale, just for your viewers, the starting salary is around $43,000 for a BA, BS type educator, and then 25 years later, your salary's in the high 50s, $56,000, $57,000, $58,000 a year. So for 25 years, the only real pay difference is some $12,000, $13,000. So with this new system, it will make a significant difference and give them certainly more money.
So you're not worried about proration? I guess that I was
no,
getting at
I mean, as a fiscal conservative, we ran the models and we looked at it, and there's a strong belief that it's sustainable. If we do have just a cataclysmic economic situation with our revenues, being severely depressed, we can pause it and just if we have to, and that would certainly be a last where we just keep it in place, but we don't increase that next fiscal year.
Understand. Switching gears to numeracy, you were the sponsor of this bill that gained a lot of steam in this session, trying to address the state's lagging math scores. You introduced it. You had multiple revisions to it. Got out of the Senate, got out of the House. Now it's on the governor's desk. How did this get started?
Well, back in the summer, I sought out people that I considered experts in math, and I asked around and said, who really knows their mathematics in Alabama schools, and it doesn't really have an agenda. They just want to see children succeed, get certainly the math concepts. And the person they directed me to is a woman that works for the AmSty program at UAH named Sheila Holt. We met in a barbecue restaurant in the summer, and I asked her, I pleaded with her, I said, will you help me on a bill? Because I didn't want it from any type of policy group or a group that may have certain agendas, and wanted to come with something different from somebody who knew what was going on in Alabama classrooms, where the deficiencies were, where they were up the line when it comes to even schools of higher ed in preparing our teachers. So sought her out. She committed and worked diligently on the bill, consulted others, brought them in, and we worked through the fall and had a product to introduce early in the session. And I have to tip my hat and say thanks to the A+ organization and what they did and how they helped so significantly, and also Representative Baker, who was the House sponsor, Chairman Garrett, Chairman Collins, all were instrumental in moving the House vote, because there was some opposition. I don't believe warranted, but people had concerns, and I certainly understand those. But I think it's going to be significant for our state, just like the Literacy Act that I sponsored with Representative Collins, and I think over time it will get us out of the cellar, literally, when it comes to mathematics education.
Well, you spoke of those concerns that folks had. There were some out there saying that they thought that this bill somehow would make Common Core be taught by these math coaches throughout the state. Can you kind of address these concerns?
How much time do we have left?
Well,
so, yes, I'll be glad to. In a nutshell, the bill actually repeals any existing Common Core affiliations or agreements or MOUs that we may have. It is built on the 2019 standards. It doesn't change them. It doesn't add to, doesn't take away the 2019 mathematics standards that have, my understanding, won some plaudits and some awards from around the country for being very solid and very good for our state. And so it just builds on those. I'm not a fan of Common Core, and certainly when it comes to history or science or social studies or things like that, I think really need to be concerned. But at the end of the day, this is math, and as I understand it, they're trying to prepare children for not only the NAEP, but how to calculate in their heads. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason it's probably a little bit different from the way you and I learned back in the day.
Mm-hmm. How important, I'm thinking back to the Literacy Act back in 2019, and implementation was so important. How important is it going to be to work with the Department of Education to see that this gets implemented correctly?
Well, that's the reason in the bill you find an Office of Math Improvement. I and others wanted some person or small group of people, this could be less than 5, that wake up every day thinking, how do we improve mathematics education in this state? And that is their sole focus, and that's what they're cut out to do. Another thing this bill does is has an intervention aspect to it, which is very important, because we've got schools, Todd, that they don't, they have 0 on the ACAP test. That's our statewide standardized test. They have 0 students that are proficient in math.
That's
amazing 0, not 1. And so that is, so that tells me we've got a school problem. Not just a teacher here or a teacher there. We've got a real school problem. So this bill will allow a reconstitution of schools. And you've probably been to George Hall in Mobile, and how that school, years ago in the middle of the projects, quite frankly, was reconstituted, and it's just a star. And people come from all over the world to visit that school and see what they've been able to achieve. So that would happen if schools don't get on board. But they'll get all the interventions, all the support. Dr. Mackey and his team have been supportive of the bill. And again, the educational community, some of them kicking and screaming, but we made changes, and they provided a lot of good changes. And I think they've got a product that everybody can rally around, and I'm excited about, again, for the future of our children.
And lastly, I just want to clarify that unlike the Literacy Act, this does not have a retention.
That's correct.
provision.
We have the school reconstitution or takeover, if it takes that. That is the stopgap measure, but goodness, we wanted a guillotine in the site, that there is a consequence if you don't get your act together. School board, school, administration in a local LEA, that we needed to show them that we mean business, and they're not going to be able to just continue to fail our students literally by not preparing them for the future.
Well, lots going on in education. I hope you'll come back and share more with us as we go forward.
Be glad to. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by State Representative Merika Coleman from Pleasant Grove. State Representative, thanks for coming on the show.
Glad to be here.
You have some pretty significant legislation this session.
Yeah.
Been working on this for a while because you're chairing this Constitution and Revision Commission. You've gotten some legislation through. Walk me through what this legislation does.
Sure. So we started in 2019, and I passed a piece of legislation that was bipartisan. So I have to let the public know that it wasn't just me by myself. My lead co-sponsor was Mac McCutcheons from Huntsville, the Speaker of the House. And so what we told the public we were going to do after passing that bill was put the commission together, 10 members, bipartisan members of the House and the Senate, along with the community, to recompile that 1901 Constitution to not only remove the racist language and things that have racist impact, but also to pull out the economic development articles of it to make sure that people who want to come do business in the state of Alabama, that they know what it says and what are going to be the pluses and what are going to be the impediments. In addition to recompiling that document so it's more user-friendly. So I'm in Jefferson County, and an amendment in Jefferson County may be amendment number 2, amendment number 222, or 522. And so we put that document together by county, and so very proud of that 10-member commission, what we were able to accomplish, and then brought it back to the legislature, and they ultimately voted it out. And then the governor signed on to that resolution, and now it goes back to the voters for them to then determine, did we do what we said we were going to do? And so that was how I couched it before when we were able to pass this in 2020 on the 2020 ballot. I said to the voters then, if you don't trust the legislature, you'll have an opportunity to come back and vote again in November. So again, we're proud about what we did, and hopefully the public will vote overwhelmingly to support this initiative again.
And so that vote will be in November?
November, on the November ballot.
Okay. You know, constitutional reform is such a touchy subject. I mean, we have what I think is still the longest constitution in the world.
That's correct.
Don't really have a rival for that. And yet any time that you start touching it and wants to reform it, a lot of folks get touchy and upset. How did y'all avoid those kind of pitfalls in doing and addressing this?
I think really the process itself. Again, for the voters having the open opportunity, even with the committee itself, we had public hearings for people to come in and talk about it. But the committee was very diverse. We had some real deal conversations amongst the committee members. And I was glad about that because some of the challenges or some of the questions that the larger public might have about poll taxes, is that actually racist on its face? Involuntary servitude, is that racist on its face? We had real deal conversations. And then to be able to all come together collectively and be able to support that and be able to give something to the legislative body. And again, for the public, we had a public comment period. Most of the comments were overwhelmingly supportive of what we did. The ones that were not about the initiative and what we were doing itself. It was about the legislature.
Okay.
They were like, is this what we need to be doing with our legislative time? So there were not folks out there saying that we don't need to update this document, that we don't need to recompile it to make it more user-friendly. They didn't trust the legislative body itself to do what it said it was going to do. That's why I'm so glad there's this additional process where the voters will get a chance to vote again in November.
And yet this comes at a time when race is so, it's always been touchy, but it seems just more touchy these days where, people are making comments in the open, and it's kind of unbelievable, some of the rhetoric out there. So do you think that's a challenge in terms of such a divisive or such a divided nation and a divided parties over the issue of race?
Yeah, well, the thing about this particular initiative, it was bipartisan, and so it shouldn't be. Our Constitution sets out our value system, and that 1901 Constitution was rooted in white supremacy. How do we know that? That's not a Merika Coleman comment. Actually, that came from the transcripts of those forefathers in 1901. They said that it was about specifically disenfranchising communities of color, not just African Americans. They also, talked about other communities of color, as well as women in their transcripts. And that sets up our value system. And so what we're telling the rest of the country and the world is that's not who we are anymore. We're not a 1901 Constitution. I'm in Jefferson County. We've got the World Games coming. We've got hundreds of countries that are coming, and we want to let them know we are open for business. We need your tax dollars, but also this is a wonderful place to come and live, to come and shop, to come and vacation, and to raise a family. So again, that is not reflective of who Alabama is today. And so I refuse to allow people to kind of get us into the divisiveness of the country and some of those debates that have been going on in the country because it was so bipartisan.
Switching gears real quick, you are carrying legislation in the House that I suppose originated in the Senate, dealing with the driver's licenses and suspending driver's licenses for some of these fees, court fees, traffic fines, and things like that. Walk me through what this bill does.
Yeah, so I'm the House sponsor, which is House Bill 200. Senator Barfoot is the sponsor in the Senate, so it is bipartisan, and that's Senate Bill 117. What we found, we got advocacy groups to come and talk with us about the challenges that people have to getting employment, to being able to secure, a home. You have to have a valid driver's license to be able to do those things. And there are quite a few folks that are poor, that have not been able to pay for traffic fines, or they have failure to appears because people move, especially a lot of low-income folks move a lot, and the court might not be able to find you, and their driver's license is being suspended. And so what does that do? It further pushes them into poverty. Today I was on a panel with my sorority. We had Delta Day at the Capitol today. Lots of ladies in red dresses were in Montgomery, and this was one of the issues. And there was a young lady on that panel, her name is Tian, and she talked about how her driver's license was suspended because she couldn't meet one of those payments in a payment plan. But she had children. She still had to get them to school. She still had to go to the grocery store. So she got another ticket. And that was further pushing her into poverty. She also testified today that she had an opportunity to have an interview with Mercedes, but she could not even get in the gate because she didn't have a valid ID. And so we want to make sure that these people have another chance for employment, for housing, especially if it's not a moving violation. We're not talking about folks that have dangerous moving violations. We're talking about the 170,000 people in the state of Alabama who need a driver's license to go to work.
Right. So that's an important distinction, because it's not for reckless driving.
That's right.
Or for DUI or something like that, which is, we want those licenses to be suspended. These are for tickets piling up, or, like you said, fines not being paid, and is suspending a driver's license the proper way to punish.
Exactly. We're not saying that people shouldn't, pay their fees. They need to pay their fees and their fines for court costs and for mistakes that they've made. We're not talking about, letting them off. We're just saying that suspending your driver's license is just not the way to do it when our very livelihood in many cases, the job that we have, the place that we can live, being able to take care of our kids, all of that stuff, oftentimes, they can be impacted if we don't have a driver's license. And I would be remiss if I did not mention Brookside and the things that happened in Brookside in Jefferson County, where all of these folks actually, the allegation is that they were targeted. And again, exorbitant tickets. When they couldn't pay those things, college students cried and testified about how that impacted them. And so in those speed trap areas also, you don't want to reward those municipalities or even counties, I hope we don't have that going on statewide, that use tickets to shore up their city budgets. And so again, these are people that oftentimes are poor, low-income folks, because people who have money can go online and pay their tickets. And so this is further pushing people in poverty. And if I have the opportunity to help somebody, especially in this bipartisan manner, I hope we get a chance to pass this bill this session.
I was going to ask you, do you think the chances are good?
We got a real opportunity. The Senate bill has made it now to the pick list for the House. Senator Barfoot has made that request. We're hoping we'll get that picked next week. We have 4 days left in the session to get it picked. And so hopefully we'll get it done. So I'll stand up there and we'll talk about it, and we'll get that bill passed this session and help these folks in the state of Alabama.
While I have you, I also want to talk about human trafficking, because
Sure.
this has been a focus of yours for several years. There were a couple of pieces of legislation moving. Well, what do they do?
Yeah, so I'm a part of the governor's task force on human trafficking. Prior to even Governor Kay Ivey becoming our governor, 2003, I've been pushing this issue in the state of Alabama along with former Representative Jack Williams. Have to always give him credit. Republican, again, bipartisan issues. And we've been trying to, for years, eradicate human trafficking in the state of Alabama. So Representative Terry Collins and I have been the lead sponsors. We've been pushing these bills together for years now. And today, we passed 2 bills. One expands the definition of coercion, because what happens is these perpetrators will threaten victims. You can't get your medicine, or we're going to call the police on you, to make them do the deed, to push them into prostitution and involuntary servitude. So we expanded that definition of coercion. In addition to when we're trying to prosecute these perpetrators. We want to make sure that our victims are protected, and the second bill that we passed out of the House today allows those victims to actually do their testimony in camera or on video, so they don't have to face those people again. So proud of that legislation. Hopefully we'll get those through the Senate, and if not, we'll start all over next year, and hopefully I'll be in the Senate to be able to sponsor those bills next year.
Well, okay, you brought it up. I was going to ask you, you're running for Senate, right?
Yes, yes.
That's an open seat that got a couple of opponents, but how's that going?
It's going great. I've been a fighter now for 20 years in the Alabama House of Representatives. Have represented not only District 57, because I've always been a state representative. So I've always carried statewide issues that have statewide impact. So even in the newer areas, I've been visible. I've gone out to speak. We're running a great grassroots campaign. That's the only way that I know how to do it. Old-fashioned, shaking hands, kissing babies, going to those community events and meeting the people, and that's the best part of it. So we feel very good about this race, and if we don't get these bills passed this year, God willing, I'll be up in the Senate and I'll be reintroducing those as Senator Merika Coleman.
Well, the Senate is quite different.
Yeah.
I mean, just really in these recent years, it's historically kind of the more dramatic body, but in recent years, they're the ones getting the work done behind the scenes. Not a lot of drama on the floor. Whereas the House, everything kind of spills out into the open.
Yeah.
I mean, you're frequently at the mic, making
all
your
the
points.
time.
Right. So are you looking forward to that in more of a collegial body?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. And I do hear from my colleagues upstairs that, hey, we're going to show you the ropes. We operate a little differently. I also think that it has something to do with the fact that the leadership in the Senate are some of those folks that were in office when they were not in the majority party. Mm-hmm. So they understand what it feels to be. I'm in the minority party now. So they understand what it feels like to be in the minority party. And I think they have those relationships from back then as well. And they negotiate differently than we do on the House side. We have a lot of new folks in the House. A lot of our leadership that's in the House right now, they never knew what it was like to be in the minority party. So I think that's one of the major differences. When you've had to be that person to participate in that filibuster, try to get those amendments on, burn days to get your issues out there, it puts it puts a little hair in your chest.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
It does. So again, I think that's the difference in the leadership in the Senate. So I'm really excited about working with the guys and the girls upstairs in the upper chamber.
Well, we will be watching. And thank you so much for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capitol Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capitol Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capitol Journal podcasts.
Next, I'm joined by State Representative Nathaniel Ledbetter, Majority Leader for the House of Representatives. Mr. Leader, thanks for coming on the show.
It's good to be here, Todd, as always.
Well, it's been a long legislative week, busy legislative week. We now have 4 days remaining in the session. Give me a sense of how you feel the session has gone so far. We're in the home stretch now.
Yeah, I'm excited about where we're at. I think we had a lot of good legislation passed. We did some strong tax cuts. I think we gave some teacher pay raises, some employee pay raises. It was needed, and we're doing some things for education. I think it's going to move it forward. It's for me, it's been a tough session. I'll tell you, it's just doing these 3 days a week, you don't get much of a break. And, it's been an election cycle where actually the election's been backed up from where it used to be. So everybody's ready to get home and campaign. But it's been a really productive session, I think. And all in all, we've seen a lot of legislation. But I'm excited about what's went on this session. I think there's going to be a good outcome for the finish.
Well, speaking of the finish, next week there's talk of maybe even a 4-day week to clear out the session. But what can we expect in these final days in the legislative session?
Well, I think you'll see, of course, us finish up the budget. I think that's a priority that we'll finish first of next week. Finished up with the general fund today, as you know, and had a chance to maybe look at going to conference with the Education Trust Fund and opted to wait till Tuesday, give it a little more time. I think we're awful close. I met with the chairman today of the general ETF, and we had a good conversation about where he's at and what they're looking at, and I think we're ready to get that done and go forward. And we'll do a lot of cleanup. We got a lot of House bills that we need to get out of the Senate. I know that the Senate will help us do that, and we got a lot of Senate bills. As of today, this will be the last day we can move House bills. It'll go through the process, through the committees and through the Senate committees and through the body. So now we'll work on Senate bills coming in next week. We'll come in 4 days and start on Tuesday and work through. I mean, I think we will probably go ahead and do our last day, the way it sounds, talking to the Speaker this afternoon, and we don't have anything that we think the governor would veto, so for that reason we'll probably complete the 30 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because in some years the legislature will take that 10-day break so that anything the governor does veto, you have the chance to override it, but you don't think that'll be necessary this year?
I don't. I think we've had some, like we talked about, good legislation, and I don't see anything really controversial. And we got really strong budgets, the two strongest budgets this state's ever had. So I think we're in good shape.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned working with the Senate, and I heard that from the senators as well, because sometimes at this point in the session, you start getting a little chippy, like, wait, have you passed enough House bills? Wait, is the Senate or is the House passed enough Senate bills? And they can start filibustering or holding up things. Do you think y'all can avoid that this time by us working together?
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, we've had some of that already. I mean, we've seen some. It happens. And I think the closer you get to the last few days, it gets a little more tense because everybody's got a priority of legislation. I mean, every member we've got, be it House or Senate member, has got a certain piece of legislation that they feel strongly about. And some of those hadn't got out. So when that happens, you see them getting a little bit antsy, wanting to get their piece of legislation out. So, I wouldn't say we won't see some of that, but I think I will say that the relationship with the leadership in the House and Senate is good, and we've been able to work through a lot of issues, and I certainly appreciate that, and I know the Speaker does.
That must be a tough task. I mean, you're the majority leader. You're the leader of the Republican caucus in the House. Everybody's got something they need, right. And it gets down to the last days. Hey, I want the attention. How do you manage that as the leader?
Well, you have a lot of conversation. It's ongoing, and most of the time when I'm on the floor, a large majority of the time it's talking about a lot of those issues. And people has got priorities they want to see, and we try to make it happen if we can to get them in a position to be successful. I think that's part of our role, and I think we've been blessed. I mean, we've got a great group of men and women that serve in the House and work extremely well together, and are, I'm fortunate enough to be friends with every one of them, and that's one of the reasons I ran for this to begin with. I told my wife when I ran, I didn't realize it, but some of the best people I ever met in my life worked right here in the House and Senate. So I think we've already got a relationship. It's just sometimes they have to understand it's probably not going to happen this year. I mean, I had a conversation just today with one of our members that wanted to do something on a particular bill, and I just told him, I've had bills that's taken me 4 years to get passed, and it's probably not going to happen for you this year. But you need to stay focused and come back next year. And most of them understand that.
I wanted to talk about mental health. You have some bills dealing with mental health, specifically on the education front, requiring and funding the fact to have a mental health coordinator in every school system in the state.
That's correct.
How is that bill progressing?
It's good. I mean, I went last week and got it out of the Senate committee. We've done passed it on the House floor unanimous, and it's a really good bill. I mean, the thing about it is we've had the coordinators for about 3 years, and basically this is really a simple bill. It just puts one in every school system, like you said, Todd, and it also removes the grant process. So in the past 3 years since we've had them, each system had to apply for a grant. So what this bill actually does, it puts them in every system, and we got the funds for it, and then it removes the grant portion of it, and they become employees. So I think that's good, because right now we actually need more employees in that field, and when you can get somebody that's really dedicated and nailed down to do that job, it's important. I mean, it's amazing. I had people come to me all over the state and say, man, This service coordinator is doing an amazing job and just talking to our kids and just working through small issues, and I think that's important because sometimes those small issues become big issues. And I think they're doing a great job, and my hats are off to them. I didn't know that it would take off like it has. We started out with 0 paid mental health professionals in our schools, and after this session, we'll have 1 in every system.
Wow. And now, I was going to ask you, when you talk to superintendents, whether it's back home in your area or across the state, do they talk more about this is a growing need in terms of focus on mental health? Maybe it wasn't there 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think it is. This has been ongoing. Of course, the state's just started funding these, like we talked about in the last 3 years. But there are some school systems that has had them for a period of time, and my local city school did have one, and that's how I actually had a visit in Birmingham schools, and they were talking about them, and I asked my city superintendent about it, and he was telling me it's one of the best things he'd ever done. And so I actually had them to come and talk to our committee. And I said, tell us why it's the best thing you've ever done. And we had the young lady last week. I had an event in my district, and she come out and spoke, and she is just an amazing young woman and doing a great job with her children.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been a big week for education in general. There's obviously the education budget that passed the Senate is going to come back down to the House. Mm-hmm. There's the Numeracy Act that the House gave final passage to also this week. First, on the education budget, you mentioned the pay raises. They're being called historic, really the biggest pay raises in a generation that focused on especially experienced teachers, retaining. Sure. And how important is that in terms of addressing the teacher shortage in our state?
I think it's very important. I think it's one of the, I'm glad we were able financially to make that move. It seems like we had a downturn in losing teachers, and as you know, we've had a hard time retaining teachers and hiring teachers, and I think this is going to fill that gap. I think with the things that's happened this session, I really believe this, I think with the things that's going on this session, and it's going to be going on in the future, we're going to see our education system start to really move up in the numbers. And I think having somebody that teaches your children that's got the knowledge and the base to do it, that's been there year after year, instead of them leaving and taking another job, because that the state recognizes the need for experienced teachers, I think this is going to benefit our children.
Mm-hmm. And that big number, $8.2 billion, record number. We've never spent that much in education before. And some folks might look at that and say, wait a second, you're supposed to be conservative. You're overspending or something. What would you say to folks that might be shocked about that number?
Well, I think the thing that they got to realize is that we've put the teachers in a situation over the past 2 years in a pandemic. 1 year we didn't give them a raise. We come back this year with a 4% raise. And now our goal is to retain good teachers so that we can educate our children at the pace they need to be educated. And not only that, but off the Education Trust Fund, we put money back. That we had a surplus of money, and we actually cut the governor's budget. When she come in, we moved it back a little bit. I think it was $125 million. And when it went to the Senate and some of the appropriations was done, I think at the end of the day we still had $45 million less than what the governor had asked to put in it. So it is a conservative. If you look at the numbers where we are, not only would you reduce the amount that the governor asked for, we also put money back in rainy day. So, and then we fully funded, of course, the A&T, and are able to use that now, which I think was a smart move. It's something that I've been wanting to do, but using it for capital outlay as well as technology and security, and so I think that's important. And I'm excited about some of the things that are going on in education. We've passed some really strong education bills this year.
You've also passed some tax cuts. And I mean, it's an election year. Come on, we're passing tax cuts. But I think $225 million was the number. Walk me through some of these tax cuts and what people can expect the differences to be.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things is when I first came in as a small business owner, I hate the personal property tax, which means if you own a small business, if you buy a chair or a computer for your office, then every year you have to be assessed on that piece of equipment, and you have to pay taxes on it. It's not just the one time when you buy it or purchase it, it's every year and depreciated out. So what this does, it caps it. And I think it's going to affect about 250,000 business, almost 75% of the small business, where they don't have to do that every year. So that's a big deal. That's going to save about $25 million to small businesses. The $200 million is where we have removed the state taxes from the federal ARPA funds and for the funds that was pushed down through the federal government. So the taxpayers in the state doesn't have to pay any state taxes on that. And then we paid $76 million into the insurance program, so the employers and employees wouldn't be burdened with that cost. So I think those are big cuts for Alabamians.
And there might be some that say, well, Alabama's one of the least taxed states in the country, some of the lowest taxes anywhere. Why do we need more tax cuts?
Yeah, well, I think the way that our economy is growing. I mean, if you look at what's happened over the last few years, and we've been very conservative in our budgeting. Alabama's one of only 5 states that has come back as strong as what it has behind the pandemic. We're number 2 in automobile production. We're number 1 in Airbus and commercial airliners, and top 5 in ships. I mean, I think those things, with the growth of our economy, then we won't have to worry about being the lowest tax state in the country. And I'm blessed in my county. DeKalb County, I think, is one of, if not the lowest taxed counties in the United States. So, and we're doing just fine. So I think the tax cuts are good for the people. They've been through a hard time too. The pandemic was tough on everybody. So I'm happy that we're able to give them some relief.
Okay, everybody's wondering, next week, 4-day week, 3-day week, what's it going to be?
Well, I would say that if I were coming down here as a member, I would stay. I'd get my room for 3 nights.
Okay,
so
all right.
If that tells you, I think we'll have a 4-day week next week and clean everything up.
Well, that'll be really ambitious and a fun week for everybody.
Absolutely.
Mr. Leader, thanks again for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Todd. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
And that's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back Monday with more coverage of the legislature as the session enters its final week. That's Monday at 10:30 p.m. here on APT. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.